I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Jason Bradford.
And I'm Asher Miller. Welcome to Crazy Town, where we do the same thing over and over again and expect different results.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. Thanks for listening. Here in Season 6, we're exploring escape routes, pathways that just might get us out of Crazy Town. In today's episode, Jason, Rob, and Asher are escaping escapism. And here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
If you like what you're hearing, please let some friends know about Crazy Town. Now, on to the show.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Asher. Let me take you guys back to the last millennium, okay? We're going to go all the way back to the year 1993, okay?
Nice.
I was in college at the time.
Me too.
And my roommate was actually the manager of the college TV station.
Oh,
You had a college TV station.
We did. It piped in through cable to all the dorms.
Did you have the Boom Goes the Dynamite guy
I wish
as
we
your
did.
sportscaster?
I wish we did. Our listeners probably aren't aware of Boom Goes the Dynamite guy, but I was essentially Boom Goes the Dynamite guy as a movie reviewer.
Oh, cool.
oh,
So my roommate was looking for somebody to do movie reviews as part of a show. And the cool thing was you got free tickets. So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. So I got free tickets to 2 movies in 1993 that are reviewed for one of the programs. Now, one of those movies was a real gem called Aspen Extreme. You guys remember that one?
No.
that one, not on my radar.
Yeah, not on anyone's radar. It's about these 2 guys from Detroit who go to Aspen and become ski instructors.
Okay.
Really like grade D
Yeah.
kind of schlock.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the other one, which I had no expectations for, turned out to be pretty memorable, awesome, and it is now in the pantheon of greatest comedies of all time, which is Groundhog Day.
Oh,
That is easily in my top 5. It's on my Mount Rushmore of favorite films.
Well, that means it's in your top 4 then,
Yeah,
not just top 5.
that's true.
You're talking of all movies or comedies?
It could be all movies, to be honest. I love that movie. And I'm glad you brought it up because I think it's a perfect parable for our season on Escaping Crazy Town.
well, I think then there may be a few viewers that haven't seen it. So let's summarize the film. And maybe we should start what even Groundhog Day is. It might just be an American thing. We have so many people who listen.
U.S. and Canada, maybe.
Yeah, but we have so many people from the Southern Hemisphere.
I think we
who
should
listen to
explain what a groundhog is.
Yeah, it's a big.
I think we should explain what the ground is.
Yeah, okay. So there's this animal in North America that likes to bury itself in the ground. It's like a large rodent, and it lives under the ground, and then it will come out of the ground at a certain time of the year the mythology is that it knows when spring is coming. It's like in sense because it's got animal spirits or whatever.
I mean, it's kind of real, isn't it? I mean, these animals do
Oh,
come out
It
of
hibernates,
hibernation.
right? It hibernates and then it comes
yeah,
out.
so when it comes out of hibernation, it's sort of indicative of how long the winter is going to last or how soon spring's coming. So it started back in 1887. They would pull a woodchuck or a groundhog, there's 2 names for these things, out of hibernation. And if it sees its shadow, then it's supposed to portend 6 more weeks of winter weather. If it doesn't, the rest of the winter is supposed to be mild. I mean, that's stupid because you just have this random cloudy day or not.
Totally.
So I don't understand.
Let's not apply science to
Yeah,
this.
you get the idea.
Yeah.
I loved it as a kid. You know, like we would track it. Like, well, is winter over?
Right.
What day is it again? It takes place like
February 2nd.
kind of midwinter, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That period where it happens is actually halfway between the start of winter and the start of spring, right? So maybe there's real significance there, but that date has special importance in a lot of indigenous cultures and religious traditions. And this one, I don't know where we got the research on this, but it kind of floors me because Christianity adopted Groundhog Day or that date as something called Candlemas, which is the feast of the purification of the Blessed Virgin, whatever the hell that means.
I don't know how that relates to a groundhog. What the groundhog has to do with it, it's probably very
They
confused.
just had to co-opt the date. They had to come up with something. It was kind of a weak one.
I'm not a religious guy, but we should not be purifying anything, okay? Let's just stay away from that kind of
Not a
stuff.
Blessed Virgins, are you? Anyways, let's talk about the movie. So the movie is about this guy named Phil Connors. He's an egotistical jerk, basically. He's totally self-centered, cynical, kind of rude to people. His job is to be a TV weatherman for some local news channel. And he goes to this town that's famous for doing this groundhog tradition, Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, to film the tradition of, yanking this poor creature out of the ground and seeing if it has a shadow, right? So he's supposed to do his weather bit, for the day there, right? And he can't wait to get out of there. But through some mysterious cosmic event that we still don't understand, he finds himself trapped in a time warp of some kind, where no matter what he does, he wakes up each morning right back in Punxsutawney, and he has to relive Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. So it takes him a while to figure this out, but over tens of thousands of days. In fact, there have been people who study the film and try to interpret, well, he did this thing and it had to taken him this many days to perfect that.
Like he became a concert pianist.
Yeah, exactly. So he
played a saxophone.
He learned French
ice
fluently.
sculpting,
So people try to calculate, well, how many days would it take you to perfect that? Right? Basically, the running theory is it was about maybe 30 or 40 years that he was stuck in this thing where he was reliving the same fucking day over and over again with the same interactions with people showing up in the same spot at the same time. And he goes through these various stages of grappling with it. And that's what's comedic genius about this movie is just the different phases, he goes through.
It's the stages of grief.
Yeah, right? Almost.
Yeah. And of course, he's played perfectly by Bill Murray.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say Ghostbusters is his top role, but I think you got to go with Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
So, he goes from trying to figure out ways to kill himself, more and more elaborate ways of trying to do that, trying to stay up all night, see if he could break the spell that way. He decides that he's going to learn everything he can about the interests of this woman who's a producer for the television station that, he wants to sleep with.
Yeah.
She's not interested in him. So he decides he's going to try to figure out everything about her and try to impress her. So that's why he learns to play the piano, learns French, learns ice sculpting. And then he becomes a good Samaritan. He helps these old women with their car, gets a flat tire.
He knows what every single problem's going to be in that town. And he just runs around the town.
He goes and saves a guy who's choking, give him the Heimlich maneuver. He saves a kid who falls out of a tree, right? He's just going through, he's doesn't know what else to do with himself.
Right.
He goes through all these stages. At one point, he becomes convinced that he's immortal, and he tries to tell Rita, this woman, that he's a god. Let me just play you that clip real fast.
I'm sorry? What was that again?
I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
Because you survived a car wreck?
You folks ready to order?
I didn't just survive a wreck. I wasn't just blown up yesterday. I have been stabbed, shot, poisoned, frozen, hung, electrocuted, and burned.
Oh, really?
And every morning I wake up without a scratch on me, not a dent in the fender. I am an immortal.
So, he goes through this whole kind of long journey in experience that, like I said, takes 40 years. There's lots of speculation about what ends up breaking the spell. The spell is broken at the end when he wakes up in bed with Rita the next day.
He sleeps in, actually.
Yeah, and he, he at first wanted just to sleep with her, but he actually winds up falling in love with her. And people have basically speculated that the lesson of this movie, the reason why the spell was finally broken after all that time, is that he finally let go of his ego, right? That was driving everything for him. And finally caring about other people and for who they genuinely are. Now, other people have come up with other theories, right? This is what's great about the internet. So there's this character, Ned Ryerson, who he went to high school with.
Yeah, annoying
guy. And every day he has to experience this guy running up to him being like,
Phil Connors?
Exactly. and Ned's thing is selling life insurance. So he's trying to convince, Phil to buy life insurance from him. And some people speculate that actually Ned Ryerson is Satan. And, getting him to purchase life insurance is actually trying to get him to sell his soul to the devil.
That's
right?
amazing, because Satan is such a nerd. He's like, now don't tell me you don't remember me. I sure as heck fire remember you, right. Ned the Head.
Well, the devil is great at coming in disguise, right? So, and Phil actually did finally get life insurance at the very end of the film, and lo and behold,
made Ned's
so
day.
Maybe that's the reason.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on Ned Ryerson. It's probably one of my favorite side characters of all time. He's like, watch the first step, it's a doozy. I don't know, he's like scene stealing. And when I realized we were going to be talking about Groundhog Day, I looked up, of course, the trivia about the movie. And the very first thing on the trivia page of IMDb, or of the actor Stephen Tobolowsky, who plays Ned Ryerson, is it said he was almost murdered twice in 1 week.
What, in real life?
In real life, in Hartford, Connecticut, by different people.
What?
Then it said,
wait, are you sure that these were not fans of the movie?
I don't, whatever, man. This is why I bring it out. It's crazy. He said, he admitted, well, that's unusual. And
Way to understate it.
Yeah, the first instance occurred when he was in a pub with a woman, and some other pub patron attacked the woman. So he got into a fight with that guy and was held at gunpoint in the pub.
Steven's got balls on him.
So later that week, he goes out with the same woman to a pizza joint that's near the pub, and he got stabbed.
What?
God.
But the knife only partly penetrated his belt buckle.
Okay, so here's the thing. What is clear here is that this woman paid hitmen to take him out.
Yeah.
I think what's clear is that there's some kind of death cult surrounding anybody that's
associated with Groundhog Day.
Day.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, there are various theories of the meaning of the film, and it's become really a cult hit for Buddhists, Jews, Christians. It's seen as this like allegory for purgatory, or the Buddhist belief in suffering and unattachment. And this film has become so popular that the Museum of Modern Art showed it as the opening night feature in a film series in 2003 called The Hidden God, Film and Faith. And there was a fight between 35 critics about who would produce the catalog for the series. They were working on the catalog for the film series, and the 35
who would get to
write about this film. Yeah. They all wanted this one as their film that was their special film.
Can you imagine the makers of this movie if they thought that was going to happen?
Yeah.
So the movie was directed by Harold Ramis, and he said that the key to Groundhog Day is learning to have insight, courage, energy, to make changes when you come to those moments when you're about to make that same old mistake again. And this is part of a quote. He said, "We face those changes every day, large and small, every single day. If you change one little thing, one little behavior, then everything might change." So I maybe Harold Ramis was thinking this movie's going to be at the museum.
I think he's
30 years from now.
I think he's dismissed, a lot of the reading that people have put into the film. He wasn't at least consciously, setting out to tell a Buddhist, story or of allegory about purgatory or whatever. But that's one of the reasons I love the film, is there is a deep kind of story to it, and his struggle to find meaning and sense. But the reason I thought it was so great to talk about this movie, and I know we talked about it for a while here, is that it really is to me, it's a great parable for our own experience here, thinking about how we escaped Crazy Town, right? This guy couldn't escape, and he couldn't figure out what it would take to escape. And it's odd because, in a sense, he does kind of escape. We don't know exactly what life is like after, right? But he does wake up on a new day at the end of the film. And so you could say, look, the guy actually
escaped. After 40 years.
But it took a long time. And I would say the theory I like the most is that it was about him letting go.
Yes.
In order to do that. And I think that is really a big thing for us when we reflect on this season. This is our kind of wrap-up episode for this season, where we try to think about all the different isms in Crazy Town that we'd like to escape. And, the bottom line is that maybe there is no escaping Crazy Town.
Maybe there is no escape.
That's why we have to escape escapism.
Okay, well, let's review this season real quick, a broad review. We attempted to frame this season around culture materialism, the anthropological theory of Marvin Harris, dealing with infrastructure, sort of the material conditions of society, structure, its rules and norms, and then superstructure, kind of the mythologies and belief systems. And we tried to then group our episodes, emphasizing infrastructure first, and then working towards the others. So, for example, infrastructure, we had early shows on industrialism and consumerism and urbanism, speedism, technologyism, globalism.
Yeah, like the whole water that we all swim in
Yes.
in modern times.
Then we followed that with more about structure or rules like growthism, capitalism, imperialism. And then finally, ones were more about the superstructure. And that was like individualism, humanocentrism, extremism, and otherism.
We really tried to identify these visions or stories or examples where we could escape from those isms. And, some were a lot easier to do than others, right? But oftentimes it felt like some of the things we were proposing to do, they fit multiple different ones of them. Like if you're going to escape capitalism and consumerism, you might kind of do some of the same things.
Yeah.
But that's not bad. Maybe that helps us identify the low-hanging fruit that we can try first.
So this is our reflection episode. So I want to start with the question: what was fun about the season? What was hard about the season? What was surprising about the season?
Okay.
And maybe I'll start. So I think I laughed the most was probably when we did our episode on globalism. We were talking about the Ever Given and trying to get it unstuck.
The big cargo ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal. And
was that the joke where we need we want to get the
they
lube
need
out?
a lube instead of sex toys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say that made me laugh pretty hard.
Shows our juvenile sense of humor,
Yeah.
which hopefully at least some of our listeners share.
Probably the most difficult was talking about the history of Nauru. I did a deep dive on that, and on the one hand, I feel like it really is so emblematic of everything that is the expression of imperialism. But goddamn, is that depressing?
Yeah.
And then, maybe what was surprising, let's be honest, was, you, Jason, confessing to us that you had an AI girlfriend when we did the episode on individualism. I was like, what is going on here?
Jason is a true podcaster.
He committed to the bit.
He's going to do the research
that's
required to get the point across.
Thank God he didn't submit for reimbursement to PCI, that whatever it was, $10 a month to pay her to actually be your girlfriend.
Yeah, my wife wouldn't let me, upgrade my relationship status, so I didn't. And so, I kept it clean. And anyway, she still reminds me of my old girlfriend once in a while when she wants to kind of jab at me. But we're doing fine. We're doing fine.
Yeah. Well, I heard that, I think her name was Sarah. I heard she quit birding. So you could just put her behind you now.
She's got a new boyfriend
Moved
online
on.
who's into crypto. Sorry. Crypto and NFTs, Jason.
Good for her. Good for her. I really enjoyed the ways that we included pop culture, in our episodes. I thought I had a lot of fun with that. The most fun for me was I was doing the research on the show on urbanism and discovered that the same dude, Paul Henning, was behind Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Petticoat Junction. I did not know that. And so I thought, boy, these seem like they're kind of, similar and stuff. And it's like, oh my God, it's one dude.
Yeah.
So that was pretty fun. The hardest episode for me was otherism, perhaps also extremism. In doing those, I just got this feeling, and I still feel this way, sort of the inevitability of this sort of really awful mass delusion and mob mentality that I see sweeping across societies and wrenching in more and more violent ways as the Great Unraveling unfolds. And this is kind of brutal to accept. And when is it going to hit home? We're going to hear about it, but will it hit home, right? That's the sort of, when is it going to come to my doorstep? Will it come to my doorstep? The surprising thing to me is watching myself go through processing this information and these discussions with everybody, with you three, or you two, or three of us.
You've lost your ability to count. That's part of the symptoms of
it's a little bit, you get flooded, you get overwhelmed. And but what's interesting is that how well I'm able to compartmentalize and dissociate. Like I can go from this to doing very normal things and be a normal human being that gets along with other people in society.
Which is, by the way, let me just point out, you call that normal.
Yeah.
And the whole thing that we're talking about here is how actually abnormal all that stuff
is.
Well,
right. And that's what's so bizarre. It's like we absorb and process this hard information, and you get this feeling that everything around us is horrifically wrong. And yet we go about the day and we function.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's a weird feeling. And perhaps we don't cope perfectly, but I do try to strike this balance where I'm not deadened and just kind of participating blithely, but I'm choosing where to put my efforts and letting that be enough. And I guess the thing is, if I'm constantly like, if I'm wearing a sandwich board or whatever, or, wearing tinfoil hats, I wouldn't be able to stay in a lot of these supportive, wonderful relationships that I have. And so I'm not dropping out and giving up, which if I was always carrying this with me all the time and sort of radiating these feelings, I don't know if that's the right, good thing to do.
Yeah. You're reminding me of our very first episode, right? About the activist Ken dressing up in a Santa suit.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like if you feel it as harshly as he does, then it becomes really difficult to go through daily life. I didn't know you were going to talk about Paul Henning and doing those various programs. It reminded me of something from previous seasons where, remember we talked about the sculptor Gutzen Borglum?
Your favorite dude.
He put the freaking Confederate guys on the side of Stone Mountain in Atlanta. And he also did this sculpture that's near my backyard. It's been taken down, but it was of the newspaper man who was he was a racist and he didn't want women to have the right to vote. And I was like, this guy's following me around. He's a dead sculptor and I got to look at his crap.
Yeah.
That whole one person having an effect like that. Okay, that's kind of dark. So I'll switch us back to, for mine, what I found funny. I got to hand it to you, Jason. The sponsor ad reads at the end of our episodes really got me laughing. A little bit behind the scenes of how we produce this. After we record, we give the audio to Melody and she puts together a rough cut, and then I listen to it and I give her feedback and whatever. We finalize the episode, but almost every time at the end, when you're doing your reads, I just start laughing. And I think maybe, this goes back to what you were saying, compartmentalizing. You could get a side gig as an ad man.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, thank you. I have fun doing those. Yeah.
As far as what I found the hardest, sometimes when the three of us are here and we're talking, we kind of know what we're going to talk about, but we also have plenty of surprises for each other. And we had a recent episode on humanocentrism. And Asher, I didn't know you were going to talk about visiting somebody's house where they had all this taxidermy and they had an elephant head on the wall. And it really, it's a very visual thing for me. And it reminded me of the episode we did before where people were abusing elephants, and it's such a majestic animal. And I don't know, it just hits me in the heart when people are like, oh, this is just something to be shot and put on a wall to say, I am greater than this.
Right.
There are some things about human behavior that are still so profoundly perplexing to me, and that is one of them.
Yeah.
I try and largely fail to have empathy for other people and decisions that they make, but I try in the regard to those things, like big game trophy hunting.
Easier to have empathy for the elephant.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that stuff's hard. Surprising to me was, so far this season, our most popular episode is Escaping Capitalism.
Interesting.
That surprises you?
That surprises me.
It surprises me because I just didn't think, I don't know, coming from our generation where it was basically a capitalism versus communism. Communism is evil. Capitalism, you equate to freedom, democracy. I felt like maybe some of that culture just lingers in a real hard way, but maybe, it's like a little miniature sign that people are ready for a different economic system and are willing to explore the limits to growth and equitable distribution of wealth and income and the kinds of policies that we need. So it's an encouraging thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised because I thought that it's been done a lot. In other words, there's a lot of people that are anti-capitalist now. I feel it's sort of common. So I wouldn't think one of our episodes about something so common would be popular, and maybe that our audience would be geared towards stuff that they don't hear elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. That's weird because that's two very different takes on why it's surprising to us. I got to get in your crowd and find these anti-capitalists.
A lot of the young people, I tell you, maybe we have more young people in our audience than we know about. Okay, so now we're going to go over a bit of like what isms did we miss or didn't have a chance to cover, and I'll start. And this is actually something that we sort of didn't cover, but also did in a sense. And that is modernism, or alternatively, we call it modernity. So when you look up the term, modernism, on Wikipedia, or whatever, you get a bunch of stuff about the arts and cultural expressions. Think of the superstructure.
Modernism, postmodernism.
Yes. So that's sort of at superstructure level. We often use the term modernity to also include the dominant infrastructure and structure of our society. And in some cases, if you add an "itty" to a word or an "ism," it's a very different meaning. But it turns out for modernity and modernism, they really aren't that different. So we can use them interchangeably. So modernity was the background for almost all the isms of this season, and a topic we covered a great deal last season. If you remember the false prophet taxonomy I did.
Of course.
Well, my most important paper of all time.
Who could forget that?
Yes. So I had a hypothesized clade of the ultra-modernist species.
Is it bad that I still don't know what a clade is?
A clade is a natural grouping of sort of terminal taxa that share a common ancestor and diverge from that common ancestor.
Okay.
Anyway. So
there's a whole group of...
Is it bad that I still don't know what a clade is?
There's a whole group of false prophet species that come from a common ancestor around modernism.
Yes,
basically.
so they all share this strong belief in modernism, as opposed to someone like Steve Bannon or the traditionalist, people that don't really... so that was the modernist clade was the most there's more species in that clade, and there's a lot of individuals. It was the dominant clade in the society right now.
Yeah. 100%.
So anyway, we've also published a few essays on resilience.org about modernity by Tom Murphy, a friend of ours. So you want to look at those if you want to assume more. So to summarize, modernity is a belief system about progress and this sort of faith in humanity's ability, using logic, reason, experimentation to shape the environment with the aid of science, technology, and it gives people the permission to throw out old ways that hold us back and replace them with what's perceived as the new and obviously then better. And so this has led us into this evolution of the infrastructure that supports industrialism, globalism, capitalism, urbanism, structural elements around nationalism, private property laws, trade agreements, banking regulations, and all these superstructural changes such as growthism and individualism.
You said modernity and modernism, they could be kind of interchangeable. But if you think of modernism as more maybe the belief system, what's interesting about what you just said around this idea that it's about having permission to throw out old ideas. A lot of what we talk about as the ways of escaping Crazy Town are actually probably viewed in the kind of dominant culture as a throwback.
Yes.
And completely antithetical, not just to the high gadgetry, complexity, high energy form of modernity. Mm-hmm. It's also the idea of modernism, that everything's supposed to be progressing in a certain way.
Right.
So to be going back to land, for example, to be repairing shit, to be using less, to make your own broom by hand, that's
right.
That's so antithetical to this belief system.
Yes. And that's what's so hard about it. And at the same time, I like the fact that we say we don't burn witches anymore. That we've got rid of a lot of the
because we don't make brooms anymore.
That's right. And so there's there's some nuance potential here. And there's a book by Vanessa Andreotti called Hospicing Modernity, and it covers a lot of the same ground here as well as this nuance. And our friend Nate Hagen's had a great interview with her recently on the Great Simplification podcast. And what she talks about in modernity is it emphasizes a sort of separation of people from what she calls Earth's metabolism, being out of relationship with living processes. And that's a conversation we actually got into in our individualism episode.
Yeah. And let's be real. I mean, if you're talking about threads that have run throughout the entire run of this podcast, we've been talking about high energy modernity. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about technology. And certainly one of the repairs that we've emphasized over and over is that lack of connection between ourselves and the places we inhabit.
Right.
And that's what this is all about. So yeah, it was kind of hard to think, let's just do an episode on that when we've woven it into every episode.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is another topic, and I shared this with you guys. I was kind of debating whether or not we would do a whole episode on, because I've been feeling actually over the course of us doing this season, I've been feeling more and more that this is an ism that I'm seeing in the world right now that I find deeply concerning, which is, I guess, for lack of a better term, I'd call it absolutism. And it's this idea, and we've talked about it before in different ways on this podcast, where people kind of fall into these false binaries,
Yeah.
these false camps. We've talked about it when people debate if it's overpopulation or overconsumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it as some people believe that we can completely transition the energy system to renewable energy and continue on the path that we're on. Other people feel like renewable energy is a complete boondoggle and sort of like nothing really in between.
Right.
What we're seeing now, and I don't want to get into the whole debate over what's happening in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza and the war with Hamas, is I find it very concerning. I've seen people become more and more rigidly polarized in their positions on this because obviously it's a very emotionally charged issue. It's horrific, the situation. And it feels like nuance gets lost in situations like that.
Yeah.
And people fall into these camps, and we've talked about it. We talked about it with otherism and extremism, where people, to find sense of security and certainty, we don't like to live in a place of uncertainty and dissonance, will fall to like answers or to fall into certain communities to belong to because we find safety there. Mm-hmm. We find like a coherence, so it's not dissonant for us anymore. And so I understand kind of like the reasons why people might fall into that. But what we see with situations like this is that the truth, quote unquote, almost always lies somewhere between these absolutist positions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to hold that nuance, that subtlety. If I could quit my job tomorrow and I was like, what am I going to do with myself? I'd be tempted to write a book about the end of nuance because that's what I feel like we're seeing. And I'm just so deeply worried that, and I agree with a lot of the position, for example, with folks on the left and a lot of students you see on campus that are very mindful about capitalism. They're very mindful about colonization and these things. But to reduce a complex problem like what we're seeing right now and the very, very complex history of this place where there are multiple peoples who have legitimate, and certainly in their view, legitimate rights to claim indigeneity, for example, to this land. To just break it down to this group are settlers, this group are the colonized, this group are oppressors, this group is the oppressed. And I just use that as one example of absolutism that we're seeing everywhere in society. We see that with political polarization. Democrats are evil, Republicans are evil, whatever it is.
I thought we covered this pretty well in the capitalism episode where it's easier to take a stance, just be anti-capitalist. Let's replace that system. Yeah. But we made a distinction between the sort of Wall Street, over-the-top corporate capitalism versus a Main Street kind of small mom and pop, outfits and wanting to have the freedom to try to run an enterprise in your community. It's very different types of capitalism. And you have to go into that nuance that you're talking about, Asher. So yeah, I appreciate that. In kind of thinking about what we covered and what we missed, I had an interesting experience kind of about 3/4 of the way through the season. I happened to have a correspondence with Gus Speth, who's kind of one of our heroes here in Crazy Town, huge influential environmentalist. And we've gotten the chance to meet him before. He used to chair President Jimmy Carter's Council on Environmental Quality way back in the day. He was a founder and president of several big nonprofits and dean of the Yale School of Forestry. Anyway, impressive character and really thoughtful.
For like 50 years, he's been saying the same thing we've been saying.
Yeah.
So, Groundhog Day.
And way better.
Talking about Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
But he sent me this list of the 24 evil isms. And it was interesting because there was a lot of, it coincided with a lot of what we picked for this season. Things like anthropocentrism or humanocentrism, as we called it, consumerism, growthism, capitalism, individualism, imperialism. But he had some other ones, too, that we missed. Although a lot of the ones we missed, I think we kind of were folding into others. Like, if you take sexism and anti-Semitism, you could put that in the otherism category. And it's funny, one of his was dualism, which I think Asher ties really nicely to your absolutism. Because I was thinking about that, like, we talk about this all the time. It's not black and white, it's gray. It's not yes or no, it's maybe.
Yeah, we don't really know enough. There's a lot of uncertainty.
The one that I think we really missed, guys, is escaping embolism.
What does that mean?
Like rolling around in all this dark shit all the time.
Okay.
I feel like I'm having a brain bleed here.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we missed that one.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
Yikes.
Well, let's turn to kind of some ahas and takeaways, major reflections maybe that each of us could come up with on this season. And one of the first things that I thought of in ponder, just thinking of the season as a whole, this escape routes, is the idea of escape as a concept is we did not actually advocate escaping a whole hell of a lot. Because, you think about what escaping is, it's sort of taking yourself out of the situation, which is pretty selfish when you get down to it. And we didn't advocate going out there and getting your Kaczynski cabin on your own piece of land and becoming, your own homesteading hermit. We were kind of like stay in the game, do things to combat these systems rather than just escaping from
But did
them.
we make a mistake there?
On certain days, yeah.
On certain days, I'm like, man, I want to dig a hole, But I don't want to do it by myself. So this is
like a grave, you mean?
like a Hobbitville, right? I'm fond of these Hobbitvilles, right? You think of all these derechos and tornadoes going on. Wouldn't they be better off if they just kind of lived a life kind of semi
Underground,
like the Groundhog people,
right.
Right,
we'll pull you out on February 2nd.
Yeah. So, I think in community, I really don't mind promoting the notion that, hey, the Hutterites do this, or these nutty hippie communes, try this stuff, maybe. It's impossible to do it on your own, like the Ted Kaczynski thing or the hermit. But boy, you can get a group of people and work together and find some way to have a livelihood in a place.
You better be careful. There's going to be a pilgrimage over to our podcast studio, and they're going to be like, Jason, where's that community you're talking about?
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing. It's like, it would be a lot easier to be kind of doing all this weird, considered weird stuff, like you're saying, Ashera, like if you weren't the only one trying to do it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because on the one hand, we don't want people dropping out. We need pro-social, wiser, humble, thoughtful, nuanced people in the game, especially to serve as kind of, sometimes I think of it as like a population of pre-inoculated people, who could kind of serve to aid others as they actually really face what we're talking about here with the Great Unraveling. So we want people to stay in the game. At the same time, it's important to have people who are kind of leading the way. They're at the edge out there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who are folks that we could turn to for models of doing things in a different way, which is a form, you can call it escaping, but it's definitely having maybe it's not full escape, but it's 1 foot out at least. It's like, it's beginning to build the other while you're still in the current. And that's, of course, a very difficult thing to navigate in your daily life, in your emotional life, in your mental space. But yeah, I think we definitely did land in a place of we're not talking about a full-on escape. That's a pretty simple thing to do, which gets to one of the takeaways I have. And it's like in some ways, a really dumb, sort of obvious one. But in some ways, all this just comes back down to the fear of death, right? Like, so many of these isms are a manifestation of the fear of that. All the things that we're trying to do to perpetuate, to grow, to progress, to distract ourselves with things. A lot of it is just driven by this inability to come to terms with our own mortality, to reckon with what is the reason we're here, the purpose of life, the meaning of it. I think it's hard for people who don't have a faith-based view of what life is, for example. And I think a lot of our listeners may relate to that. I'm not a person who's driven by faith, So yeah, I think that's like a pervasive underlying struggle. We've talked about this. We did a whole episode on that, which might be one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. And maybe one of the most important ones, because I think in some ways, if we can reckon with that, process that a little bit and then letting go, it harkens back a bit to what maybe the lesson is of of Groundhog Day.
So are you suggesting that we should all take part in the purification of the Blessed Virgin?
I do it on a weekly basis. This whole thing about once a year,
that came out of my mouth, but I have no idea what that's all about. So that's just realize that's coming from an ignorant.
Don't
fool.
overthink
and to our Catholic friends, we apologize.
Don't overthink it, please.
Yeah.
There was a lot of the criticism of modernity was about that, a share that replacing sort of the idea of the spiritual realm and God, and that humans then set themselves up with secularization and the scientific method and the idea that you have all this knowledge as now the gods, as we no longer need that God.
Well, remember the episode we did on Stuart Brand, right? He was like,
yes, we are now gods. So this is what's interesting, is that now we're getting to the AI moment in history where now this is now the next level of God. This is our God.
Right. Which has gained its wisdom by just basically scouring the internet and stupid things that we've written over the millennia.
Yeah, right? Like teenagers on Reddit or the Onion is now treated as, a source equal to the Times.
And that's our source of wisdom, great wisdom.
It truly threatens to supercharge all of the shit that we talk
100%.
about.
And the acceleration is, believe it must, like in order, the eco-modernist types that know about the bad trends related to modernity are just believing that technology is going to be some sort of savior. So it is a very, very strange moment to be in, and it all seems to be coming to a head.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that struck me on this season, and it's an important thing to remind yourself of, is that we're a bunch of hypocrites over here. And I think most people trying to live in this sort of balance that we've been talking about, like stay in the game, but realize what's really going on. And it's like, you can't help but having some hypocrisy. So an example of this is we did that episode on escaping technologyism. So, you want to get away from technology, but what are we doing here? We're using technology to get our message out to as wide an audience as we can. Whoever that audience is, they're listening on some high-tech device somewhere. Yeah. We just heard from somebody who listens, somebody named Inez, who works in Ecuador, growing cacao sustainably.
Oh my gosh.
And I was amazed. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, this person likes what we're doing. Totally different part of the world, different kind of jobs, and it's amazing to be able to reach out to somebody like that and be able to hear back.
Yeah. That is wonderful.
And they're not here at the table with us, able to jump in the conversation, but you still get a little bit of connection that way. At the same time, we're saying we got to escape doing this, but it's like we're sort of stuck in it for the time being because it's the best way that we can come up with to get these ideas more widespread.
To be effective, right? You have to participate in some ways.
It's interesting one because it comes back to that whole idea of attachment. So maybe we try to use, we operate within these isms as benevolent and light-footed a way as we possibly can, in as just way as we can, being mindful about it, but not be too attached to needing that, this technology.
Like if I lost it, I'd be okay though.
Which I think, you obviously were okay. You were able to go to squirrels. You found your way to squirrels.
I did.
And you had lunch with somebody who paid for your lunch because you
left your phone at home.
Technology.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Incredible story.
Lewis and Clark has got nothing on you.
Yeah. Who was the guy that got stuck in the Antarctica?
Are you talking about Shackleton and those guys?
Yeah.
Pikers compared to you. I want to talk about escaping cultural materialism. We kind of oriented the entire season around Marvin Harris's theory of cultural materialism. If anyone's listening to this episode, I would guess you've listened to previous ones, so we don't necessarily need to go ad nauseum into describing what it is. But his theory of infrastructure, structure, and superstructure, we kind of use that as a rubric in a sense of looking at these isms. And we emphasize the idea that infrastructure is the driver, and in our defense, I think most people tend to believe that the world is constructed starting first from our belief systems and our values. and then goes out from there. So we build the world the way that, we envision.
Be the
in our
change
minds.
you want to see, kind of thing.
And I think the emphasis on infrastructure is not so much to say it all comes from infrastructure, and the infrastructure is the only place to intervene, but it's just recognizing that the thing that we take for granted changes how we actually see the world, what we think is possible. Right?
I think that's important. I also, the way I've tried to soften it is when you read, it gets critiqued often as like, well, this is deterministic.
Right.
But I would say that the way you look at it, it's weighing probabilities.
Yeah.
So think of it more as infrastructure puts weights on the probability.
Infrastructure weighs a lot.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, we've already said that it outweighs biomass, right?
But it's going to shift the probabilities towards certain outcomes.
Right.
And if you see the same infrastructure occur in different locations, like the agricultural revolution independently occurred in different parts of the world. And guess what? It led to monumental architecture and imperialism in many of these cases. Yeah. And so this is what they mean. It doesn't always mean that any agriculturalist is going to turn into an imperialist, but it means you're weighing the probability that it provides the opportunity for that to happen through things like concentration of stored food and wealth and hierarchy and specialization. So people kind of have hackles raised when they think about determinism, but it's really about weighing probabilities.
Well, I think that to me, cultural materialism has been a useful construct. When I first really grappled with the idea of particularly the role of infrastructure, it was a profound aha for me and very useful. But it doesn't mean, talking about absolutism, it doesn't mean that we're saying, see the world only through this one prism, And so there's a question about like what other theories of change or ways of interpreting the world and understanding how we move through it and how we escape what we're currently in. Do you think that we might want to learn from?
Yeah. Well, on that front, I had a pretty cool exchange with Mike Packard, who is a friend of the show, former PCI intern, and now man of the world working on conservation. And the exchange was about sort of a Marvin Harris versus Donella Meadows, which of course,
like a prize fight kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a boxing match,
Okay.
right? No,
they're both dead.
He was talking about kind of their ideas. So, like, if you look at the Marvin Harris idea of, hey, change the infrastructure, or maybe that's a key way into making a whole worldview change in society. If you go back and read Donella Meadows' ways to intervene in a system, where she's trying to talk about how do you make change, what are the big leverage points, her number one on that list is that you have to change people's mindsets, their paradigms.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
that superstructure.
Yeah, it's turning the Marvin Harrison direction. Again, credit to Mike for thinking of that idea, because it had really escaped my attention, but it's really good to think about. And I think we got there on a number of times. It's never this is the one way in, right? There's multiple ways in if you want to make changes. And some people are communicators. Some people are going to go out and change the soil or unpave the concrete zone or hammer on that infrastructure. And we've also mentioned Beth Sawin, who was a student of Donella Meadows, and she runs the Multi-Solving Institute. And she has an interesting perspective on this, which is you have to start with a vision. Hopefully it's a deeply positive vision of what you want society to be. So that's kind of superstructure. But when you have that, people go off and do various different things, and you can have this multi-solving approach where, Jason, you're going to be growing the stuff.
Yeah.
Me, I'm going to be making the poop jokes, okay?
Nice.
Asher's going to be brooding. But you combine those three things and,
you get a shit chance sandwich.
You got something. But, it's like trying to find different ways to address what's wrong and have them align into something that...
Like fractals, operating fractals where there's a coherence around them and we're operating at different levels, and simple rules that are applied at all those different levels.
Poop jokes, by the way, aren't my favorite, but they're a strong number 2.
Oh my God.
Wow, that is rough.
Sorry about that.
You just had to do that, didn't
I just had to. I had to get that. It's the last episode of the season. I've been holding that for a long time.
Oh my God, stop it.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, let's just flush this conversation.
I'm leaving. Those are my footsteps walking away.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong.
My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
If we can't really escape and we have to face that we're sort of stuck in the times and the situation that we're given, and we have a certain infrastructure that surrounds us, what is it that we ought to do? And one of the things that's come up, I think, among the three of us over and over is just don't be fatalistic about this. Sure, things are bad. Sure, there's tragedy in the world. But to fall prey to cynicism and fatalism, it's not going to help you in your own mental state of mind.
It's a horrible place to be.
Right. And you're not going to be the life of the party, that's for sure.
I think people turn to it because it is a form of escape.
Yeah, it is.
So I think what we're saying is escape that escape.
Yeah.
Escape that temptation.
Yeah.
Well, and there are some...
Which is an understandable one.
I think there are some helpful ways to think about it. One is to look into Stoic philosophy, basically get to the understanding of the things you cannot control, and you're going to have to stop fretting about those.
Right.
It's not easy. I fall prey to this very often, and I think about it a lot. You know, I get really upset by certain things that happen around me that I have zero control over them. You know, and my tendency would be, why don't they know what I know? Why don't they think like I think? Why don't they do what I want them to do?
Right.
And there's no forcing that. So you have to let that go and focus on the things that you can control. And I think this ties into Joanna Macy's vision of what she calls active hope, right? I mean, we could all just fall into fatalism and just hope things are going to go all right and not deal. But active hope is just that. It's being active. It's understanding that there is beauty, there is goodness here, and that we can act on behalf of that. And, you know, we people, we humans are part of this world. We belong to it. We're in the ecosystem, and we have a part to play. So go play it.
Not trying to do everything, right? Because it's impossible to do everything. But what feels natural for you? What do you find compelling? Give it a try. We need a huge variety of people trialing models or just getting their own skills together, their own perspectives. There's not one thing to do. There's no silver bullet. This is a poly crisis, and we need so many different kinds of responses from all different places. And I just want people to find their role in that. And maybe they even let go of the idea of success in whatever term that might be. Emphasize the process of you becoming something new, like Bill Murray did in Groundhog Day.
Well, your role might change over and over again.
Yeah.
You don't have to do the same thing for the whole rest of your life.
You're going to be an ice sculptor, and then you're going to be
a classic pianist. Yeah. You're going to be a Heimlich
you have 40
maneuver.
years to perfect all these skills.
I feel like there's some themes here in what we're talking about. There's the embracing and accepting the uncertainty of where we are. It's a letting go a little bit in terms of our attachment to outcomes, which is hard to do because not only is our own safety and the security of our loved ones at stake, we see a lot of pain and suffering in the world that we don't want to exist. And it's not to say to become heartless, but it's back to what we're talking about with the fear of death, maybe the Buddhist approach to an attachment. It's not giving up on living. It's just about accepting the things that we can't control and that there are forces that are bigger than us. But if we operate with coherence, like a coherent set of values, you could see all of these openings and opportunities for places to engage. And that's even true for those of us who are straddling two worlds, right? We're straddling the current world of modernity and capitalism and, you know, all the isms that we're trying to escape from.
Yeah.
You know, but we can have one foot out trying to build the alternative. And maybe, you know, we could put out a challenge to our listeners and a challenge to ourselves to kind of make a commitment to maybe learn one skill, to develop an expertise or a knowledge of something that might be helpful either in the transition out of what we're in or the creation of what comes after that. So Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's for each of us, if there's something that we might make a commitment
Well, like
to.
me, I kind of made the commitment 20-something years ago to learning how to grow. I didn't know how to do anything related really to gardening or farming.
Yeah.
And I just made a commitment to it. And I'm trying to stop at that too, because I always these ideas like, well, if I grow this, then I can process it and I can turn in something fermented, and this can turn into this wonderful high value product. Like, actually, no, I just don't want it. I don't want to do that.
It's a little insight into your brain, always trying to add a
right.
next.
And I'm trying to
step.
say, no. I want to find someone who will do something with this.
Right.
You know.
For me, the idea of mastering some skill, I would want it to be some cool thing like an indigenous master used to do. Like they would find the perfect branch off of a yew tree.
Oh, with the right curve in it.
Carve it into a bow. Like I think that would be really amazing, but I worry about my actual craftsmanship. If you don't have the person who knows how to do it teaching you, or so one of the things that I've started on that I think I can do is intervening in messed up situations. So it takes a toll sometimes when I've done this, but when the pandemic hit and the streets of Portland got kind of chaotic, a lot of times I would see stuff happening that's like, well, that's not cool. Like that person seems to be attacking that person, and I could just ignore it, but I would intervene and try to do something about it. Or somebody's on some kind of drug, looks like they're going downhill fast. Like you could walk away and that person might end up dead.
Right.
So I think there's this thing that happened where I was like, I'm just going to intervene, and I'm going to see if I can stop this from turning violent or turning bad. And I'm not saying I've mastered that or I'm skillful at it, but I've started on that path, and I think I'd like to get more skillful. When we've talked to people and talked in episodes about mutual aid, one of the key ideas is the cavalry ain't coming.
Yeah.
So figure out how you can be of assistance and do so safely.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah, otherwise you'll end up like our buddy Ned stabbed in a bar.
Stay away from women named Henley, I think is what her name was.
Is that what it was? Okay.
I think so.
That's a good rule of thumb. I hope our listeners are paying attention.
If you've learned one thing this season, it's stay away from people named Henley.
Well, I've been dipping my toes in growing food. It's something, my wife has done for a really long time. We used to have a really great garden before we moved to Oregon and started living under trees. But joining your farm club, your growing club,
awesome.
Jason.
You're doing great.
Right now, I'm just following orders. You basically boss me around with your one good arm.
Yes.
Telling me what to do.
Yes, but you
I'm good at following orders.
Yes, you are good at following, and you're learning a lot of skills fast. I'm very proud of you.
There's something else that I picked up and then put down and picked up and put down, but maybe I will make a redoubled commitment to, and that is actually learning how to play the guitar well enough to actually play it. And the reason is because it's one of those technologies, especially like the acoustic guitar. We joked before about technologies that were post-carbon ready. You know? So much of our entertainment now comes through devices, produced by multi-million production.
The Hollywood elites.
From far away, right? But, in the future, creating art, bringing joy to people or feeling or whatever it is, creative pursuits, I think are really key to keep people sane, to help them be connected. So maybe that's something
for your own soul too. I mean, playing live music with friends and singing, that's
if you become a mediocre guitarist, I'll be your mediocre vocalist.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
I know, it sounds wonderful. But I think we need a neo-Luddite movement of some kind.
Okay.
So we're kind of talking about that. So if you look at the Luddites, they were
So we need to burn down factories? Is
that I'm not so sure about that. But like we're saying, let modernity do its thing, I guess, but as it's failing, have these skills that are pre-modern in some ways.
Yeah, like when you're in the market for real estate, just think about whittling your next house instead of buying it.
Or building out a cob or something.
Or what did you say? Dig a hole in the ground.
Yes, yeah. Figure out your local, what are the best places to make a hobbit town? Yes.
But actually, you think about some of the structures that were built pre-industrial revolution.
Unbelievable.
Incredible.
Unbelievable. The pyramids.
Yeah. Well, cathedrals.
Taos Pueblo.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is something there about when we talked about Krista Decker, low tech stuff. which really straddles that line between high energy modernity stuff and being so anti-technology that you're
digging sticks.
Nothing beyond a digging stick and a fig leaf.
Yeah.
These are the two technologies you can.
I think our listeners are probably, if they're listening to us and they actually like what we have to say, they're probably fairly good at this already, but strengthening our ability to not conform to what's happening out there. We're constantly being put in front of us these absolutist propositions, belong to this camp or that camp, or new technologies being shoved down our throats. Like AI is going to probably become ubiquitous, and it's going to be hard to avoid it. And even as we're using some of these things, to be nonconformist in our use of them, to be judicious in our use of these things, in our participation in the current system, recognizing that this is either a short-lived phenomenon that nobody's aware of, like everyone's at a party that's about to end,
right,
or is kind of a form of collective insanity, which is hard to do, but trying to keep that lens on the world
right,
while you're still moving through it. And to your point, I think, Rob, which is like, there are times to actually speak up and speak out and be an active nonconformist to things that are setting us down a really bad path. And that might even be doing direct action in opposition to things that we see as just utterly devastating. So, think about who you run with and who you spend time with, what groups you belong to. In a sense, that's a form of conforming, but to think that you're going to do it all on your own is, I think, asking too much of ourselves. I mean, it's part of why we at Post Carbon Institute we've launched Resilience Plus, which is kind of a membership area at resilience.org that we really hope to grow into a community. And it's a weird, you can call it hypocrisy, you can call it living in that bizarre space between, but we're using technology to connect people so that they don't feel alone and they can maybe connect with other nonconformists who are struggling to try to figure out where they can make a difference in the system and how to escape. Because the truth is, trying to do this on your own is, I think, an impossible task.
I think it's a really key concluding point of the season is, Jason, you were saying some pretty eloquent things earlier about he was. It's
amazing.
It's a first. I mean, it's taken.
Shocking.
This is our sixth season.
Right.
So he has AI now to help.
But,
yes.
You were talking about how do you deal with your own feelings as you consider all this heavy stuff, and yet you got to compartmentalize so that you can have relationships and go about your life. And I think one of the very, very key things to do if you are contemplating that it's 125 degrees in the city, or in that the place is so politically polarized and there's all this misinformation and we can't burn any more fossil fuels, all that, you need to find some people that you can discuss these things with. It's one of the therapeutic things that happens right here in the studio with the three of us, is that we've shared these ideas. We're not perfectly in sync on all of them, but we can discuss with humor and with
honesty,
honesty and some, we can test the waters on different ideas and responses. And it's really important to find people like that. Not only who you can talk to, but think about who would you want to be with when things get kind of shaky? Can you find some folks to ride out some storms? And it's not easy, but I think a really important thing is building community with
Are you sure you want to be asking that question right now? Because when I start thinking about it and I'm looking at the two of you, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, we each have a dog, as we mentioned, so there's...
At least we got dogs.
There's a companion. And while we're talking about communities, I do want to express really heartfelt appreciations to the people that help us with this podcast. Producer Melody, we've got help from Cassidy doing research this season, had volunteer help from Tyson also on research, and then Clara helps us communicate the episodes, get it out to the public. Taylor has been instrumental for many seasons now in helping us with transcripts.
Yeah, she has to actually listen and correct the transcripts of our stupid.
Wow.
All my ums and likes and knows.
Well, and of course we have to give some thanks to the listeners and the people who tune in and who send us feedback. And, and I also want to note people who've helped us in past seasons too. We've just had a lot of community support, and really appreciate that.
Love the listener feedback.
And of course, we have to thank all the people out there, the individuals and institutions that give us fodder for this.
Yeah, thanks to all you people and your othering and your capitalist nightmares.
If there's one thing I can feel confident will grow is fodder for us, for this podcast.
That's got to be our next one. It's all about the growth. How do we grow?
Exactly. Be well, everybody. Talk to you later.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Ever since scientists have looked and found oodles of plastic nanoshards in human testes, men of reproductive age have been asking, how do I get rid of this stuff so my baby batter is functional? Introducing Testicle Cleanse, the one and only product that reliably flushes the phthalates, polyethylene, bisphenol, PFAS, and associated heavy metals from your nuts. Follow up your cleanse and keep the family jewels polished with the Testicular Purity Program, which will eliminate nearly all plastic exposure in your life as you transition to live in one of our secure, secluded ancient monasteries. That's right. Become a testicular Puritan, or TP, and eliminate environmental damage to your precious gonads. TPs are surrounded by all natural materials in isolation from industrial civilization and exclusively eat the organically grown raised food by themselves and fellow TPs. Testicle Cleanse and the Testicular Purity Program, because every long-tailed viable sperm is now sacred.
Crazy town, da 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 da, crazy town.